The words hung between us, soft but sharp, like the heat of her breath close to my ear, like the way her hand brushed mine just a little too long, but not enough to call it intentional. She sat across from me at the tiny café table, the late afternoon sun pooling on her hair, the way it caught those strands of silver like whispers of a life I didn't fully know but wanted to. There was a grace in her, something careful but unshakable. She was the kind of woman who owned every room she entered, not by shouting, but by simply being there. Confident. Subtly vulnerable. A quiet storm I could never quite predict. I watched her, the way her eyes flicked up from the chipped mug she held, as if weighing something too heavy to say aloud. The space between us was small but charged, like the calm before a spark, and I felt the pull, an electric, nervous tug in my chest I wasn't sure I could explain. Her fingers traced the rim of the cup, and for a second, our hands touched. Not full contact, just the softest brush, but it sent a ripple through me, like dropping a pebble into still water. I didn't pull away. I couldn't. You always say that, she murmured, her voice low, almost a question. The mind part. I shrugged, trying to sound casual, but my voice betrayed me. Because it's true. She looked at me then, really looked. No teasing, no games. Just a long, slow look that made my throat tighten. There was something in her eyes, a mix of wonder and something else, maybe caution. Maybe hope. Around us, the cafe buzzed softly with quiet conversations and the clink of spoons against porcelain. The scent of coffee, faint and bitter, hung in the air, mixing with the warm sweetness of vanilla candles flickering on nearby tables. Outside, a late breeze stirred the leaves on the sidewalk, but here, between us, time seemed to slow, thick with things left unsaid. I wanted to reach out and hold her hand, to close the space, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, "You don't have to worry about who sees us." Her smile was almost a sigh. "That's what scares me." I leaned in, careful not to crowd her, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from her skin. "Then let them see." Her eyes darted to the window, then back to me. There was a flicker of something I couldn't place, a shadow behind her calm. She swallowed hard, biting her lip, and the tension stretched between us like a fragile thread. "People talk," she whispered, "about things they don't understand." I nodded, but I didn't say anything. Because what I wanted to say was dangerous, reckless. That none of it mattered when she was near. That the way her hand felt in mine erased all the noise. That I'd cross every line if it meant keeping her close. Her breath hitched, and suddenly the door swung open, breaking the moment like a dropped glass. A gust of cold air rushed in, scattering the quiet between us, and I watched her flinch just slightly. The moment was gone, but something deeper had just begun. She glanced at the doorway, then back to me, and I saw it there, a question lingering in her eyes, fragile but fierce. "Are you sure about this?" I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "More than anything." And maybe, just maybe, that was the truth neither of us was ready to say aloud yet. The cafe had emptied out by then, the soft hum of conversations replaced by the quiet scrape of chairs being stacked. Outside, the sky had darkened to a bruised purple, and streetlights flickered on, casting pools of gold over wet pavement. She pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, but I caught the faint tremble in her hands, a crack in the confident armor she wore like a second skin. "I wasn't always like this," she said, voice low, almost like she was confessing to herself. I waited. She seemed to wrestle with the words before they came. "After my divorce, I thought I was done. Done with trusting. Done with..." She shook her head, lips pressed tight. "Feeling seen and then forgotten." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching. I saw the weight she carried, the loneliness buried beneath years of pretending not to care. I swallowed, the honesty stirring something raw inside me. "I get that. I've always been careful. Not because I don't want connection. Just because it's easier to keep people at a distance." She smiled then, a fragile thing, like a bird testing its wings. "The age difference doesn't help," she said softly, almost a joke but not quite. "People look. They talk. Sometimes I wonder if I'm just fooling myself. I glanced at her hand resting on the table, fingers curling slightly. I reached out, brushing my thumb lightly over her knuckles. Her breath hitched, barely audible, but enough. It's not just that, I said, voice barely more than a whisper. It's what we're risking. What we might lose if it goes wrong. Her gaze dropped to the spot where our hands touched, then back up, eyes glimmering with something I couldn't name. You don't have to pretend with me, I said. Not here. She shifted closer, so close I could feel the warmth of her breath as she spoke. Sometimes I forget you're younger. I forget the world's noise. A shiver ran through me, that electric charge that came from being seen, really seen, in all the messy, beautiful ways. Her fingers lingered on my arm, gentle but deliberate. I didn't pull away. Instead, I leaned in, the space between us charged and fragile. The cafe's dim light flickered overhead, casting soft shadows that seemed to mirror the quiet tension threading through us. She looked down for a moment, then up, and in that pause, something shifted, an unspoken promise hanging between us, fragile but real. Then, without breaking eye contact, she whispered, "Whatever happens next, I don't want to lose this." I nodded, words unnecessary. Because right then, with her hand still resting in mine, everything else, the risks, the judgments, the years between us, faded into the background. All that mattered was this, a moment, a touch, a chance. The cafe was nearly empty now, only a few scattered late-night stragglers nursing their drinks. We sat closer than before, our knees almost touching under the table, but neither of us dared to close the last inch. Her hand still rested lightly on my arm, fingers trembling just a little, betraying the calm she tried so hard to wear. I caught her glance, sharp and fleeting, like she was weighing something dangerous. I was about to say something reckless and honest, when the door swung open. My breath hitched. She stiffened beside me. Not a stranger, but Alex, her longtime friend, the one person who didn't know. Or maybe didn't need to. Alex's eyes flicked over us, pausing just a moment too long on the closeness between me and her. A smile curled at the corner of his mouth, something unreadable. "Hey," he said, sliding into the booth opposite us without waiting for an invitation. Her fingers tightened on my arm. I swallowed hard. Alex started talking, something about work, a story I barely caught. But his gaze kept darting between us, like he was trying to read a secret written in the silence between words. I glanced at her. Her eyes were wide, vulnerable for a second before she blinked it away. The space between us shrank. My hand itched to reach for her face, to brush the stray hair from her cheek, but I froze. She leaned in, just a breath closer. Her lips barely parted, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the fragile curve of her mouth and the sudden, wild thumping of my heart. But then Alex laughed, sharp and loud, breaking the spell. Her breath brushed against my cheek as she pulled back, an apology without words. I wanted to tell her it was okay. That I wanted this. That none of the risks mattered. But the hesitation, the weight of every whispered judgment, kept my voice locked inside. The guilt gnawed at me. Who were we fooling? What were we risking? She caught my eyes, searching, vulnerable, and then looked away, as if afraid of what she'd find there. Silence stretched, heavy and loud. Alex finally glanced at his watch, mumbling something about needing to leave. He stood, giving one last curious look, and then he was gone. We were alone again. Her hand trembled when she moved it to mine, this time covering it, anchoring herself there. Closer than ever, but still hesitant. I felt her breath against my neck, warm and steady, and the pull was almost unbearable. "Maybe," she whispered, voice thick. "Some things don't wait." I didn't answer. Instead, I leaned in, the space between us vanishing, until all that was left was the quiet tension of almost, and the question hanging between us, what if we stop holding back? Her eyes were like a storm, wild, restless, and impossible to look away from. We stood in the dim glow of the street lamp outside the cafe, the night wrapping around us like a secret we both held too tightly. The air was thick, too warm for September, but cold enough to make her shiver just slightly against me. I reached up, fingers trembling as they caught a stray lock of hair, brushing it behind her ear. The softness of her skin against my palm sent a jolt through me, and I swallowed hard to keep my voice steady. "You're not just some story I'm telling myself," I whispered, my breath catching near her cheek. "I can't pretend anymore." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, leaning into the touch as if it both scared her and soothed something raw inside. When she opened them again, the vulnerability was gone, replaced by something fierce, like she'd been holding back a flood for far too long. "I'm scared," she said, voice barely more than a breath. "Scared of losing everything. Of what people will say. Of what I'm feeling." Her confession was a crack in the surface, and I saw the years of silence and restraint behind it. "I don't want to be afraid," I said, stepping closer, the heat between us igniting. "Not with you." Her hands found my chest, fingers pressing lightly but with purpose. The tension in her touch was electric, a mix of desperation and control. For a moment, all the hesitation, the guilt, the fear, melted away, leaving only the ache of wanting. My lips hovered near hers, breath mingling, heartbeat thunderous and wild. She didn't pull back. But before we could cross that line, the sharp ring of a phone shattered the quiet. Her eyes flicked to the screen, a name flashing in harsh blue light. The spell broke. She stepped back, a flicker of guilt and regret flashing across her face. "I shouldn't have." I reached for her again, voice low, almost desperate. "Wait." Her gaze met mine, fierce and fragile all at once. "Don't let this be the moment we lose." I held my breath as the night waited with us, suspended, trembling on the edge of everything we'd both been too afraid to say. The ringing faded into the night, but the tension lingered, thick and tangled. She stared at her phone, thumb hovering, hesitation written in every line of her face. Then, without a word, she slid the screen toward me. A message. Not just any message, one from Alex. "I saw you with him." "I know." I blinked, the words hitting like a punch I didn't see coming. Her breath caught. She stepped back, the space between us suddenly vast, colder. Her hands trembled at her sides, fingers brushing against the edge of her coat as if to steady herself. "I didn't want you to find out this way," she said quietly, voice fragile, breaking the fragile spell we'd been clinging to. I searched her eyes, looking for the truth hidden beneath the fear. I thought I was careful," she admitted. "But Alex, he's been watching. Waiting. Maybe hoping." The weight of it pressed on me, betrayal and protection twisted together in a complicated knot. I wanted to pull her close, to shield her from it all, but the fear held me back. Instead, I ran a hand through my hair, the rough motion grounding me in the moment. "You should have told me," I said, voice low but steady. "We could have faced this together." She shook her head, a sad smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Maybe I was afraid of what that would mean." Her eyes met mine again, sharp, searching, desperate. Then, almost without thinking, I stepped forward, closing the gap, the heat between us igniting anew. Her breath itched, and her body responded, leaning into me despite the chaos swirling around us. Fingers brushed against my arm, hesitant but electric, and I felt the pulse of something fierce beneath her skin. "We're not safe," she whispered. "But maybe that's the point." Her words echoed in the quiet night, daring, dangerous, and filled with the promise neither of us could ignore. I swallowed hard, heart pounding with a mix of fear and something far more thrilling. "We'll figure it out," I said, voice steady despite the storm inside me. She nodded, the tension easing just a fraction, but the fire between us was only growing stronger. As she reached for my hand, a bold question hovered between us, unspoken but impossible to ignore. How far were we willing to go? The night pressed in around us, thick and heavy, like the weight of every unsaid word and every stolen glance that had led here. We stood on the narrow sidewalk beneath the flickering street lamp, her breath warm against my cheek, the soft hum of the city fading into the background. Our bodies were just inches apart, close enough that I could feel the quickening of her pulse, the subtle rise and fall of her chest beneath the light fabric of her coat. Her eyes searched mine, wide and unguarded, and for the first time, I saw everything laid bare, the regret, the longing, the fear. "I'm not asking you to decide now," she whispered, voice trembling like a fragile thread. "But I can't pretend I'm not falling." I swallowed hard, the raw honesty in her words cutting through every hesitation I'd held on to. "I'm scared," I admitted, voice barely more than a breath. "Scared of what this means, and what it could cost." Her fingers found mine, gripping tight as if anchoring herself to the moment, to me. "Me too," she said, the tremor in her voice a mirror of my own. "But maybe some risks are worth taking." The tension between us pulsed, a fragile, beautiful thing, messy and imperfect, but real. I reached up slowly, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, my thumb tracing the line of her cheek. Her eyes fluttered closed, and I could feel the quiet surrender beneath her skin, the unspoken invitation. The world narrowed until all that existed was the heat between us, the steady beat of our hearts, and the fragile promise hanging in the air. Then, just before our lips met, a whisper, a breath, a moment suspended between hesitation and surrender. She pulled back slightly, searching my eyes, her voice low and urgent. "If we do this, we have to be honest. No more hiding." I nodded, the weight of her words settling deep inside me. No more hiding. And in that raw, trembling clarity, everything shifted, the fear, the doubt, the years of silence, giving way to something fiercely alive. We stepped closer again, no longer afraid, no longer holding back. Because sometimes, the only way to truly be seen is to risk everything, and finally, we were ready. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the quiet room where we sat side by side, fingers tangled together like they'd always belong. No grand gestures, no perfect lines, just the steady rhythm of being close, of sharing space without needing to fill the silence. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, breath slow and even, and I could feel the steady thump of her heart beneath my palm. The years between us, once a barrier so sharp it cut through every thought, now felt like nothing more than a number, irrelevant against the slow, steady pulse of something real. "I was scared," she said quietly, voice soft and honest. "Scared of losing myself, or you, in all of this." I squeezed her hand gently, careful not to rush the fragile moment. "Me too," I admitted. "But maybe fear's just the price we pay for wanting something that matters." She smiled then, a small, knowing smile that reached her eyes and settled there like a secret finally shared. The doubts hadn't vanished completely, and they probably never would. But they no longer held us hostage. Instead, there was this: the warmth of her skin next to mine, the way her fingers fit perfectly between mine, and the quiet certainty that we'd chosen each other despite everything. We stayed like that for a long time, no words, just the soft sound of breathing and the slow, steady beat of two hearts learning how to trust. When she finally lifted her head, her eyes met mine with something tender and unspoken. I leaned down, brushing my forehead against hers, the simplest touch, but one that said everything. In that moment, the world outside faded away, leaving only us, flawed, messy, and beautifully real. And I knew, without needing to say it aloud, that whatever came next, we'd face it together.